Today, I am able to share with you the good news that thanks to early diagnosis, effective intervention, and adherence to doctors' orders, my own schedule of cancer treatment can be reduced in the new year. This milestone is both a personal blessing and a testimony to the remarkable advances that have been made in cancer care in recent years.
They told us he was fine. They lied. Prince William just walked up to those microphones, and what came out of his mouth has left the entire world in absolute shock. King Charles's condition? Far worse than anyone imagined. The palace has been hiding something truly sinister, and the cover-up goes deeper than you think. What William revealed about his father will make your blood run cold. 18 months of lies, deleted medical files, secret meetings, and one word that confirms our worst fears.
Service. My father's first words on entering Westminster Abbey yesterday were a pledge of service. It was a pledge to continue to serve, because for over 50 years, in every corner of the UK, across the Commonwealth, and around the world, he has dedicated himself to serve others, both current and future generations, and those whose memory must not be neglected.
You need to hear this before they take it down. The palace has long operated on a principle of carefully managed information, where every word released to the public passes through multiple layers of advisors, communication specialists, and legal teams. This approach has served the monarchy for generations, allowing them to maintain an image of stability and continuity even during turbulent times. However, when William chose to speak directly, bypassing these traditional channels, it immediately signaled that something fundamental had shifted. Royal watchers and journalists who have covered the family for decades noted that this departure from standard procedure was unprecedented in modern royal history. The word that has dominated headlines since the announcement is one that William used deliberately and without qualification: irreversible. In the context of discussing King Charles's medical condition, this single word carries profound implications. It suggests not a temporary setback or a condition that might improve with treatment and rest, but rather a situation that has reached a point of no return. Medical experts interviewed by various news outlets have pointed out that when such language is used in relation to health matters, it typically indicates a degenerative process that cannot be stopped or reversed, only managed. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Crowds that had gathered outside Buckingham Palace, initially there for routine tourist visits or to catch a glimpse of the changing of the guard, found themselves witnesses to history. Reports from people present describe a collective silence falling over the assembled masses as the gravity of William's words became clear. Some were seen openly weeping, while others stood in stunned disbelief, struggling to process what they had just heard. What happened in the weeks leading up to this announcement has now become the subject of intense scrutiny and investigation by journalists and royal correspondents. According to multiple sources within palace circles, the crisis actually began several weeks earlier during what was described as a routine weekend at Sandringham, one of the royal family's private estates. The official schedule had indicated nothing unusual, just a standard retreat for rest and private meetings away from the constant attention of London. The timeline of events that evening has been pieced together from various accounts provided by individuals with knowledge of the situation. At approximately 7:43 in the evening, staff members discovered King Charles unconscious in his private study. The discovery came during what should have been a routine check, as the king had been engaged in a confidential telephone call with a foreign official. When staff entered the room, they found him slumped over his desk, the phone line still connected but silent. What followed was a carefully choreographed response that revealed just how prepared the palace machinery is for such emergencies. Rather than calling standard emergency services, which would have immediately alerted media monitoring police and ambulance radio frequencies, a secure communication channel was activated. This allowed for the dispatch of paramedics and medical professionals without the usual sirens and flashing lights that would have drawn immediate attention. The response was swift and professional, but also remarkably discreet. Staff members present at Sandringham that evening were reportedly required to sign non-disclosure agreements on the spot, a measure that underscores the seriousness with which the palace viewed the situation. Even long-time employees who had served the royal family for years found themselves suddenly restricted from certain areas of the estate and excluded from information they might normally have been privy to. This level of security and information control, while not entirely unprecedented, was notable for its swiftness and thoroughness. The king's medical team worked to stabilize him, though details of his exact condition in those crucial first hours remained closely guarded. What is known is that once Charles was stabilized, the focus immediately shifted to managing the information flow and determining who needed to be informed and in what order. This is where the story takes on additional layers of complexity and raises questions about decision-making processes during royal crises. According to sources familiar with the events, Queen Camilla's response to the emergency has become a point of significant discussion and, in some quarters, controversy. Multiple accounts describe her as remaining remarkably composed during the crisis, focusing primarily on logistical concerns and press management rather than expressing visible emotional distress. While such composure might be seen as admirable under pressure, some staff members reportedly found her demeanor unsettling given the circumstances. One senior member of the household staff was quoted as saying that Camilla seemed to have anticipated such an event, asking detailed questions about legal procedures and media contingency plans while the medical situation was still unfolding. The notification of other senior royal family members followed a specific protocol, though the timing and manner of these notifications would later become sources of tension. Princess Anne, the king's sister and a senior working royal known for her dedication to duty, was among the first to be alerted. She was placed on a private helicopter and transported to Sandringham within the hour. Her arrival, though discreet, was noted by local residents who observed the unusual evening air traffic to the estate. Prince William received his notification shortly after his aunt, and he too was rushed from his home at Windsor with a full security convoy. Photographs of his arrival at Sandringham, later obtained by media outlets, show a man whose facial expression conveyed unmistakable concern and urgency. These were not the carefully composed features typically presented during official royal engagements, but rather the raw emotions of a son responding to a family emergency. However, it is what happened regarding Prince Harry that has raised the most questions and generated the most commentary. Despite being King Charles's son and a senior member of the royal family, albeit one who has stepped back from official duties, Harry was not notified until nearly 5 hours after the initial emergency. By the time he received word at his home in California, the immediate crisis had passed, Charles had been moved under heightened security, and protocols for potential royal incapacitation were already being quietly implemented. This delay in notification, whether intentional or simply a result of the chaos of the moment, represents a stark illustration of how far Harry has drifted from the inner circle of royal decision-making. Behind the scenes, the medical professionals attending to King Charles were beginning to observe patterns that suggested this was not a simple case of exhaustion or overwork. While the palace's initial communications to the public spoke of fatigue and the need for rest, those with direct knowledge of the king's condition were seeing indicators of something far more serious and far more concerning for the long-term stability of the monarchy. In the days following the emergency at Sandringham, Prince William withdrew from public view in a manner that sparked immediate speculation among royal watchers and the media. While official statements cited the need for privacy during a difficult family time, what was actually occurring behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle painted a far more troubling picture of a man grappling with responsibilities he had not fully anticipated, and revelations that would shake his understanding of those closest to him. Those with access to the private quarters at Windsor have provided accounts of William during this period that stand in stark contrast to his usual public persona. The Prince of Wales, typically known for his measured composure and careful adherence to protocol, was reportedly showing signs of severe emotional strain. Staff members who had served the royal household for years described observing him pacing the long corridors of Windsor late into the night, often appearing disheveled and visibly distressed. These were not the brief moments of private frustration that any person might experience, but sustained periods of what appeared to be genuine anguish. Security footage from within the palace, portions of which were later leaked to media outlets by an individual whose identity remains unknown, showed William in moments of complete vulnerability. The images depicted him with his hands covering his face, his posture suggesting someone bearing an almost unbearable weight. For a man who has spent his entire life learning to maintain composure in even the most challenging circumstances, this breakdown represented something profound and deeply concerning to those around him. Reports from individuals close to the situation describe a pattern of behavior that oscillated between explosive anger and extended periods of eerie silence. During meetings with advisors and family members, William would sometimes erupt in fury, his voice rising to levels that required intervention from security personnel. Other times, he would sit for hours without speaking, staring into Mshwatswe, the middle distance, as if grappling with thoughts too heavy to articulate. This erratic behavior was entirely out of character for someone known for his steady temperament and diplomatic approach to conflict. Queen Camilla became a frequent target of William's anger during this period. According to multiple sources within the palace, there were several confrontations between the two that grew so heated that staff members felt compelled to physically separate them. These were not polite disagreements conducted in hushed tones behind closed doors, but full-throated arguments that could be heard through the heavy oak doors of state rooms. One member of staff, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the situation by saying that William was not speaking as a prince bound by decorum, but as a son who felt he had been fundamentally deceived by people he should have been able to trust. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, found herself in an increasingly difficult position as she watched her husband unravel under the pressure. Known for her calming influence and diplomatic skills, she attempted to provide stability and remind William that the world still needed to see the strong, capable heir to the throne. However, even she privately admitted to close confidants that she feared William was reaching a breaking point. The emotional toll was visible not just in his behavior, but in his physical appearance. He was sleeping poorly, eating irregularly, and showing signs of the kind of stress that can have serious health consequences if left unchecked. One particularly difficult evening, William reached out to his aunt, Princess Anne, in what those familiar with the call describe as a moment of complete breakdown. The conversation, which extended well past midnight, revealed the depth of William's crisis. Sources close to the situation report that his voice cracked with emotion as he confessed that he no longer knew who in his circle could be trusted. Princess Anne, herself a pillar of strength within the royal family and someone known for her no-nonsense approach to duty, attempted to provide comfort and counsel. However, even she had begun to harbour suspicions that the full truth about King Charles's condition was being deliberately withheld from family members who had every right to know. Meanwhile, the king's condition continued to deteriorate in ways that medical staff found increasingly alarming. The symptoms that had initially been dismissed as signs of exhaustion or stress were revealing themselves to be indicators of something far more serious. Reports mention episodes of confusion where Charles would seem disoriented about his surroundings or unable to recall recent events. Physical tremors became more pronounced and frequent. Periods of disorientation would sometimes last for extended durations, raising serious questions about his ability to carry out even basic functions, let alone the demanding responsibilities of a reigning monarch. A medical team attending to Charles offered no reassuring timelines for recovery, no optimistic prognoses, only clinical assessments delivered with professional detachment. Each update seemed to confirm what everyone feared, but no one wanted to acknowledge openly. The situation was not improving, and there was no indication that it would. For William, each piece of medical news felt like another step in a countdown toward an inevitable conclusion he was not ready to face. It was during this period of mounting anxiety and confusion that William's suspicions began to crystallize into something more concrete. He started asking pointed questions about the timeline of his father's illness. When did the symptoms first appear? Who had been informed, and when? Why had he, as the heir to the throne and the king's son, been kept in the dark about the severity of the situation? The answers he received were evasive, contradictory, or absent altogether, which only deepened his conviction that something fundamentally wrong was occurring behind the scenes. The breaking point came when William made an unannounced visit to Clarence House, one of his father's official residences. He arrived without prior notice, moving past staff members who had been given instructions to keep certain areas of the residence locked and off limits. What drove him to take this unusual step remains a matter of some speculation, but those close to him suggest it was a combination of instinct, frustration, and a desperate need for answers that no one seemed willing to provide. Inside his father's private study, a room where Charles conducted much of his personal business away from official state matters, William began searching for anything that might shed light on what was being hidden from him. It was in the bottom drawer of the king's personal desk that he discovered a folder that would change everything. The folder was worn with age and handling, labelled in Charles's own handwriting with the words that immediately caught William's attention: confidential private health. The contents of that folder told a story that contradicted everything William had been told by palace officials and medical advisors. Medical reports dated back not weeks or months, but a year and a half. 18 months of documented symptoms, test results, specialist consultations, and clinical observations. The progression detailed in these documents showed a pattern of decline that had been occurring for far longer than anyone outside a very small circle had known. Every page William turned revealed another layer of deception, another instance where the truth had been deliberately obscured. Among the most damning documents were those stamped with urgent notations from medical specialists. These files specifically mentioned the onset of a degenerative neurological disorder, complete with detailed descriptions of symptoms that anyone familiar with such conditions would recognize as serious, memory lapses that went beyond normal forgetfulness, tremors that indicated neurological deterioration, unexplained fatigue that suggested systemic decline. All of these signs had been documented, analyzed, and reported to someone, yet not once had William or the general public been informed that anything more serious than routine stress was affecting the king. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the evidence that some of the documents had been tampered with. Pages were missing from what should have been complete medical records. Sections of reports had been redacted with heavy black ink, obscuring information that someone clearly did not want seen. Doctors' signatures appeared inconsistent across different documents, raising questions about who had actually authored or approved certain reports. It became clear to William that someone had made a deliberate effort to manipulate the medical trail, to create a narrative that differed significantly from the clinical reality. As William pieced together the timeline using the documents before him, a pattern emerged that pointed toward a systematic cover-up involving multiple individuals. The finger of suspicion, according to those familiar with his thinking at the time, pointed most directly at Charles's private physician, a doctor who had enjoyed a long and close relationship with Queen Camilla. What had once seemed like simple professional loyalty now appeared to be something far more calculated. The physician's role seemed to extend beyond medical care into the realm of political maneuvering, his silence strategic rather than ethical, his omissions deliberate rather than accidental. The fury that overtook William in that moment was described by staff members who were present as unlike anything they had witnessed from him before. He was overheard shouting accusations, his voice carrying through the halls of Clarence House. "They let us believe it was nothing," he reportedly yelled, the betrayal evident in every word. He slammed the folder down on the desk with such force that the sound echoed through the room. Turning to his security chief, who had accompanied him on the visit, William spoke 6 words that everyone present understood would mark a turning point. "This changes everything. Everyone must know." The discovery of the hidden medical files set in motion a series of events that would fracture the royal family in ways not seen in generations. Princess Anne, known throughout her life as perhaps the most dutiful and stoic member of the royal family, was about to step into a role that would test even her legendary composure. When William shared what he had found with his aunt, her response was immediate and unequivocal. If what the documents suggested was true, then accountability needed to be demanded, and it needed to be demanded immediately. The confrontation that followed has become something of legend among palace staff, spoken about in hushed tones by those who were present or who heard about it from reliable sources. It took place at Balmoral, the Scottish estate that has long served as a private retreat for the royal family, far from the prying eyes of London media and the constant scrutiny that comes with proximity to the capital. The setting was deliberately chosen for its privacy, but what occurred there was anything but a quiet family discussion. Princess Anne had requested a meeting with Queen Camilla and the king's private physician, ostensibly for what palace staff assumed would be a routine update on Charles's condition. However, Anne arrived at the meeting with an entirely different agenda. William had already briefed her thoroughly on everything he had discovered: the hidden medical files, the redacted documents, the 18-month timeline that no one had shared with the family, and the growing evidence that key information had been deliberately withheld from those who had every right to know it. The meeting took place in one of Balmoral's drawing rooms, a space typically associated with relaxed family gatherings and pleasant afternoon teas. On this occasion, however, the atmosphere was anything but relaxed. According to accounts from staff members who were stationed nearby, Anne's demeanour from the moment she entered the room signalled that this would not be a cordial exchange. Her voice, which in public settings is always measured and calm, carried an edge of barely restrained anger that those who know her well recognised as a sign of serious displeasure. Looking directly at Camilla, Anne reportedly spoke words that have since been repeated throughout palace circles as a defining moment in the crisis. "You have weaponized silence," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "You kept us in the dark." The accusation was direct and devastating, cutting through any pretense of politeness or diplomatic language. This was not a princess speaking to a queen consort with deference, but one family member confronting another over what she viewed as a fundamental betrayal. The king's physician attempted to interject, perhaps hoping to diffuse the situation with medical explanations or appeals to protocol. However, Anne was not interested in hearing justifications or excuses. She had come for accountability, not explanations. Her questions came rapid fire, each one designed to expose what she believed was a coordinated effort to control information. She demanded to know why she and William had been left completely blindsided by the severity of Charles's condition. She wanted to understand how a diagnosis this serious could have been filtered through what she characterized as deliberate lies and obfuscation. Most pointedly, she asked how long Camilla had known the full truth while others remained in the dark. Camilla, who throughout her years in the royal family has developed a reputation for not backing down in difficult situations, responded with characteristic composure. Her defense centered on the argument that her actions had been motivated by a desire to protect Charles from panic and to preserve the dignity of the crown during a vulnerable time. She maintained that the decisions about what information to share and when to share it had been made with the best interests of the monarchy in mind, not out of any desire for personal gain or control. However, Anne was not persuaded by this line of reasoning. In her view, what Camilla characterized as protection looked far more like control. She accused the Queen Consort of using the King's decline as an opportunity to consolidate her own influence within the power vacuum that was inevitably forming. Rather than ensuring that proper procedures were followed and that family members were kept informed, Anne suggested that Camilla had instead worked to position herself as the primary gatekeeper of information and decision-making authority. The argument escalated rapidly from there. Voices that had started at conversational levels rose to shouting, bizarre. Tension in the room became palpable, with staff members positioned outside the door reporting that they could feel the intensity of the confrontation even through the thick walls of the centuries-old building. At one point during the exchange, witnesses report that Princess Anne's eyes filled with tears, though these were not tears of sadness, but of pure fury at what she perceived as a betrayal of her brother during his most vulnerable moments. She shouted that Charles deserved better than to have his decline manipulated and managed by people more concerned with controlling the narrative than with his actual well-being. The monarchy, she insisted with evident passion, did not need preservation through deception and carefully managed lies. What it had always needed was truth and transparency, even when that truth was difficult or uncomfortable. Her words struck at the very heart of how the royal family has traditionally operated, challenging generations of precedent about managing public perception and controlling information flow. The confrontation reached its climax when Anne, having said what she came to say and clearly unsatisfied with the responses she received, stormed out of the drawing room. The sound of the heavy oak doors slamming behind her echoed through the corridors of Balmoral, a physical punctuation mark on an exchange that had shattered any remaining pretense of family unity on this issue. Staff members who had been lingering in nearby hallways, ostensibly attending to their duties but clearly aware that something significant was occurring, were visibly shocked. One longtime employee, speaking later to media contacts, remarked that in all their years of service they had never witnessed Princess Anne lose her composure in such a manner. The aftermath of the confrontation sent shockwaves through the interconnected world of palace staff, royal advisors, and family members. Lines were being drawn, not along traditional hierarchies or protocols, but along fundamental questions of loyalty, truth, and the proper way forward. In the days that followed, Princess Anne and Prince William grew noticeably closer, united by their shared sense of betrayal and their conviction that the time for secrecy had passed. They began meeting privately, away from official channels and palace oversight, coordinating their response to what they both now viewed as a crisis not just of health, but of institutional integrity. Their discussions focused on how to honor Charles, to protect the dignity and future of the monarchy, while simultaneously tearing down the walls of secrecy that had been erected around his condition. It was a delicate balance, requiring them to navigate between their roles as family members and their responsibilities to an institution that had existed for over 1,000 years. The challenge was to find a way to be truthful without being destructive, to be transparent without undermining the very foundations of the crown. As these private meetings continued, one absence became increasingly noticeable and increasingly painful for those involved. Prince Harry remained thousands of miles away in California, still unreachable through normal family channels, still silent on the crisis unfolding within his family. His physical distance from the situation seemed to mirror the emotional and relational distance that had grown over the past several years. For Anne and William, who were dealing with the crisis in real time, Harry's absence felt less like a choice and more like an abandonment at the moment when family unity was most needed. Meghan, Harry's wife, also remained publicly silent on the matter, offering no statements of support or concern through her various media channels and platforms. For a family that was quite literally drowning in crisis, struggling to navigate unprecedented challenges to both personal relationships and institutional stability, the silence from California carried a sting that many found difficult to ignore or forgive. However, even as the family splintered along these fault lines, William was approaching a decision that would alter the trajectory of the entire situation. Despite the risks, despite the potential consequences, despite the voices urging caution and restraint, he was becoming increasingly convinced that the public deserved to know the truth about what was happening to their king. The question was no longer whether to speak, but how to do so in a way that would serve both truth and the institution he would one day lead. The internal debate that followed was intense and often bitter. Senior palace advisors, some of whom had served the crown for decades, argued strenuously against public disclosure. They warned of panic in the streets, of constitutional crises, of irreversible damage to the carefully cultivated image of royal stability. Legal experts weighed in with concerns about precedent and protocol. Communications specialists painted dire pictures of media frenzies and public relations disasters that could take years to overcome. Queen Camilla was particularly vocal in her opposition to William's inclination toward transparency. She characterized his thinking as premature, driven more by emotion and personal hurt than by strategic consideration of what was best for the monarchy. She accused him of allowing his grief and anger to cloud his judgment, of risking the institution for the sake of personal catharsis. Her arguments were forceful and backed by advisors who shared her view that discretion and carefully managed information were essential to maintaining public confidence. The confrontation reached its peak in what has been described as a dramatic showdown inside Buckingham Palace's Crimson Drawing Room. The room was filled with voices, each trying to outmaneuver the others, each convinced that their approach was the only viable path forward. Senior advisors debated strategy, media consultants outlined communication, plans. Legal minds passed constitutional implications. And through it all, William sat listening to people discuss his father's legacy as if it were merely a chess piece to be positioned for maximum advantage. Finally, after hours of back and forth, William spoke with a quiet firmness that cut through all the competing voices. "This ends now," he said, and the room fell silent. The debate had reached its conclusion, not through consensus or compromise, but through the decision of the man who would one day be king. Camilla made one final attempt to dissuade him, her words sharp and her arguments pointed. She called his decision reckless and warned of consequences that could not be undone. William's response was measured but absolute. He looked directly at Camilla and spoke words that summarized everything he felt about the path the palace had chosen. "You had your turn protecting the throne with lies," he said. "Mine begins with truth." Even his closest advisors were stunned by the directness of his statement. What he was proposing was not merely unorthodox, it was a fundamental break with how the monarchy had operated for generations. Catherine, standing beside her husband throughout the ordeal, gave him the affirmation he needed. In a private moment, she told him that while his decision might earn him criticism and anger in the immediate aftermath, history would ultimately judge him kindly for choosing truth over convenience. That support proved crucial in William's resolve to move forward. Behind the scenes, the palace machinery shifted into crisis mode. Press teams who had spent years crafting careful narratives suddenly found themselves preparing for unprecedented transparency. Emergency meetings were convened with parliamentary liaisons, Commonwealth representatives, and key political allies. The hours before William's planned public address were filled with frantic phone calls and last-minute preparations for a level of royal candor that had not been seen in living memory. Then, in a moment that staff members later described with an almost reverent tone, something remarkable occurred. King Charles, drifting in and out of lucidity in his private quarters, barely aware of the turmoil his condition had created, spoke a phrase that William would carry with him to the podium. Those present at his bedside reported that Charles murmured, "Do what is right." Whether he fully understood the magnitude of the decision being made in his name remains unclear, but those 4 words provided William with something he desperately needed: a blessing from the man whose legacy he was about to reshape through truth. The moment Prince William stepped up to the podium, the world held its breath. Cameras from news organizations across the globe were positioned and ready, their lenses focused on a man who was about to break with centuries of royal tradition. The statement that followed lasted less than 6 minutes, but its impact would reverberate far beyond those brief moments. William began without preamble, without the usual formalities that typically accompany royal addresses. His voice was calm and controlled, the product of years of training in public speaking and composure under pressure. But listeners tuned to the subtle nuances of tone and expression noticed something different. There was a tremble barely perceptible when he reached certain phrases, particularly when he spoke the words that would define the entire address. "My father's condition is severe," William said, his eyes fixed on the assembled media. "It is progressing." The choice of words was deliberate and devastating in its clarity. This was not the language of hopeful recovery or temporary setback. This was the vocabulary of irreversible decline, spoken by a son who had been forced to confront a reality he would have given anything to avoid. He continued with information that the palace had guarded closely for 18 months. "My father has been diagnosed with a progressive neurodegenerative condition," he stated. "This is no longer a matter of fatigue or recovery. This is a fight we cannot win, but one we will face with dignity." The directness of the language marked a departure from how the royal family has traditionally communicated about sensitive matters. For generations, palace statements have been characterized by careful ambiguity, by phrases that suggest without confirming, that hint without declaring. William's approach was the opposite. He was giving the public a name for what had been hidden, a clear acknowledgement of what medical professionals had known for far longer than anyone outside a small circle had been aware. The progressive neurological condition he described had been advancing slowly and steadily, while public appearances were carefully managed and official statements spoke only of minor health concerns. Within minutes of the statement's conclusion, responses began pouring in from around the world. Global leaders, many of whom had worked with King Charles over his decades of public service, released statements of support and solidarity. Messages arrived from Washington, where the president expressed sympathy and respect for the king's years of dedication. Similar sentiments came from Berlin, Canberra, Ottawa, and capitals across the Commonwealth and beyond. The Vatican issued a statement of prayer and support. The United Nations Secretary-General offered words acknowledging Charles's contributions to various international causes over the years. Monarchs from other countries, presidents, and prime ministers all added their voices to a growing chorus of formal tributes. However, the response within the United Kingdom itself told a more complex and emotionally charged story. Within hours of William's statement, thousands of people began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. They came carrying candles, flags, and handmade signs expressing support for the king. The scene was remarkable in part because King Charles has been, throughout his time as monarch and during his years as heir, a somewhat divisive figure. Public opinion about him has fluctuated over the decades. influenced by personal controversies, political positions, and the inevitable comparisons to his mother's long reign. Yet, in this moment of crisis, something shifted. The crowds gathering in the cold evening air were not there to debate his legacy or critique his choices. They were there to express a shared sense of grief for a man facing an unwinnable battle, and perhaps more broadly, grief for the loss of stability and continuity that his decline represented. The online response was immediate and massive in scale. Social media platforms saw an explosion of activity as people around the world shared their reactions. While many posts expressed prayers, sympathy, and heartbreak, others began asking more pointed questions. How long had the palace known the full extent of Charles's condition? Who had made the decision to keep this information private for so long? Was the king actually capable of performing his constitutional duties during the period when the public was being told he was simply tired or overworked? These questions, uncomfortable as they were, reflected a growing erosion of trust between the institution and the public it serves. Conspiracy theories, inevitable in the age of social media, began to proliferate almost immediately. Various hashtags related to the royal family surged to the top of trending lists on multiple platforms. The mixture of genuine concern, legitimate questions about transparency, and baseless speculation created a complex and often contradictory public discourse that palace communications teams found nearly impossible to manage or control. As William concluded his public statement, he offered one final promise to the nation and the world. "We will not allow this moment to weaken the crown," he said. "We will face it, as he always did, with courage." The words were clearly intended to provide reassurance, to signal that despite the personal tragedy unfolding, the institution itself would endure. For some listeners, this provided genuine comfort, a reminder that the monarchy had weathered storms before and would do so again. For others, however, the promise raised as many questions as it answered, because the power vacuum left by Charles's incapacity was already beginning to pull the institution in multiple directions, with various factions and individuals positioning themselves for influence in whatever came next.